100 pigs poured through an iron gate like a living flood, and Garrett Vale's perfect garden vanished beneath them. Hedges toppled, flower beds dissolved into churning mud. The banker screamed for the police while half the town watched, certain the old veteran had finally cracked. Eli Mercer just folded his arms and smiled. He knew exactly what those pigs were doing. 40 years earlier, before any of that, Eli's grandfather had knelt in a barren field and pressed a boy's hand flat against cold dirt. Land remembers everything, the old man said. You can buy it, fence it, paint it pretty, but you can't fool it. Soil knows the difference between somebody working with it and somebody bossing it around. Young Eli hadn't understood. He'd nodded the way children do. Decades later, standing on his own dying acres, he finally heard every word his grandfather had buried in him. Eli Mercer lived at the end of Cutter's Road in a farmhouse that needed paint and a porch that needed nails. He was 63, lean as fence wire, with hands that had learned patience the hard way. He woke before the sun, fed his animals before himself, and spoke to people roughly as often as the weather changed, which, in that valley, was not very often. The town of Hollow Creek knew him for two things. First, his quiet. He'd served 20 years, come home, said little about any of it, and asked for nothing. Second, his pigs. 100 of them, rescued over 3 years from auctions, foreclosures, and a failed operation 2 counties over. People said he'd lost his sense. 100 pigs on 40 tired acres? They ate everything, cost a fortune, and produced nothing but mud and noise. Folks shook their heads at the diner. Poor Eli, they'd say. All that discipline, wasted on hogs. What they didn't see was the trouble underneath it all. Eli's land was failing. The back 40 had gone hard and sour, compacted by decades of the same crops planted the same way by the family that sold it to him. Nothing grew there now but stubborn weeds with roots like steel cable. Each season, his usable acreage shrank. Each season, the bank notice in his kitchen drawer grew more urgent. That bank was the Hollow Creek Savings and Trust, and its president was Garrett Vale. Garrett Vale was the kind of man who wore a watch worth more than a tractor and made sure you noticed it. He'd grown up in the valley, left for the city, and returned with money, opinions, and a freshly built estate on the hill above town. His garden was famous. 3 acres of imported hedges, ornamental shrubs trimmed into spheres, flower beds arranged by a designer flown in from somewhere expensive. Garrett liked to say his garden proved a simple point. Anything could be perfected if you threw enough money at it. He held Eli's mortgage. He also held a low opinion of Eli, the farm, and the pigs. Sentiment, Garrett called Eli's whole way of life. Sentiment doesn't balance a ledger. Eli never argued. He'd just touch the brim of his cap and go back to work. But every morning, walking his ruined back 40, watching the pigs root happily through the muck of their pen, an idea kept turning over in his mind like soil under a blade. An old idea, his grandfather's idea. He just needed a reason brave enough or foolish enough to try it. The reason came on a bright Tuesday at the autumn harvest fair, in front of half of Hollow Creek. Garrett Vale stood beside the prize vegetable table, holding court. When Eli passed by with a basket of modest squash, Garrett laughed loud enough to carry. There he is, the pig general. A few people chuckled nervously. Tell me, Eli, when's the great hog farm turning a profit? Or are you just feeding 100 mouths for the joy of going broke? Eli stopped, said nothing. My garden, Garrett went on, sweeping a hand toward the hill, took 18 months and a designer's vision. That's what money does. Your grandfather's dirt-under-the-nails routine? Charming. Useless, he leaned in. Hard work's a story poor men tell themselves. The crowd went quiet. Eli set down his basket, and for the first time in years, something in him decided it was time to stop being quiet. You think money beats the land, Eli said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. I think the land doesn't care what's in your wallet. Garrett grinned, delighted to have a fight. Big talk from a man behind on his mortgage. Then let's make it simple. Eli looked him square in the eye. Your garden, 3 acres of perfect. You let me bring my pigs up there for one afternoon, turn them loose, and let them do what pigs do. One season later, we look at what's left, the crowd murmured. Somebody actually gasped. Garrett blinked, then laughed so hard he had to wipe his eyes. You want to turn 100 filthy hogs loose in my garden? My garden? That's the offer. For a moment, even Garrett hesitated. Not from doubt, from suspicion. Why would I ever agree to that? Because you won't be able to help yourself, Eli said. You want to humiliate me in front of these folks. This is your chance. One afternoon, and you get to watch the old fool wreck himself. If I'm wrong, you tell the whole town. If I'm right, he paused, you say so, out loud, right here next fall. That night, Eli sat at his kitchen table and stared at the bank notice. His niece, Marisol, who'd come to stay for the season, while she figured out her own next step, watched him from the doorway. You don't have to prove anything to that man, she said. It's not about him. Eli turned the notice over. That back 40's dead, Mari. I've tried everything I know the regular way. Tilling just makes it worse. I either find another road or I lose the farm. Grandpa had a way. Pigs first, then everything else. I've read about it, watched the old films, but I've never had the nerve to try it on land that mattered. He almost smiled. Vale's giving me a free practice field, 3 acres I don't owe anything on. If it works there, I'll know it'll work here. And if it doesn't work, then I'm the town fool and I deserve it. He set the notice down. But Mari, I felt that dirt today walking past his beds, all that mulch and money. It's pretty on top and starving underneath. It's not so different from my back 40, just dressed nicer. The doubt sat heavy on him all week. He weighed it, paced it, lost sleep over it. What if his grandfather had been wrong? What if 40 years of memory had softened into a fairy tale? But every time he visited the back 40 and felt that hard, lifeless ground refuse him, the answer got clearer. He had to try. On Friday, Eli drove into town and walked into the Hollow Creek Savings and Trust. Garrett looked up from his enormous desk, surprised. I accept, Eli said. Your terms, my pigs. Next Saturday. You'll want it in writing, so neither of us can wiggle out. Garrett leaned back, that watch glinting. You're serious, dead serious, one afternoon. You signed that I had your permission, so nobody calls it trespass or mischief. And you agree to be there, watching, the whole time. Garrett studied him, hunting for the trick. Finding none he could name, his pride filled the gap. He pulled out a pen worth more than Eli's truck. You realize this is the single dumbest thing I've ever seen a man do. Maybe, Eli said. Sign anyway, he signed. Marisol became Eli's anchor through it all. 31, recently laid off from a city marketing firm, she'd arrived bruised by a world that valued speed over substance. The same lie Garrett preached, just with a better logo. She'd planned to stay 2 weeks. She stayed for the pigs. At first, she humored her uncle. Then she started reading his grandfather's brittle farming journals at the kitchen table, asking real questions, filming the animals on her phone just in case. Something in the slow, honest work of the farm began healing the part of her the city had worn down. Eli was teaching the land. The land, through him, was teaching her. Saturday came clear and cool, the kind of autumn morning that smells like wood smoke and turned earth. Word had spread the way word always does in a small town, fast, distorted, and irresistible. By 9 o'clock, a crowd had gathered along the white fence of Garrett Vale's estate. The diner crowd, the church crowd, the high school kids, the old farmers who remembered Eli's grandfather. Somebody had brought a cooler. Somebody else had brought folding chairs. It had the feel of a fair or a spectacle or both. Eli arrived in a caravan of borrowed livestock trailers, Marisol riding shotgun, 3 neighbor boys he'd hired for the day following behind. He stepped out in his work clothes, calm as a Sunday, and the crowd buzzed. Garrett stood at the top of his garden in a cream-colored sweater, arms crossed, smiling like a man about to win a bet he'd already spent. Beside him stood his garden designer, a thin man named Pierce, who looked physically pained to be near so many trailers. Last chance to back out, General, Garrett called down. I'll even let you keep your dignity. Most of it. Appreciate it, Eli said. But I'll see it through. He walked the perimeter of the garden first, slow and deliberate, while everyone watched. To the crowd, it looked like a doomed man surveying his own foolishness. But Eli was reading the ground. He noted where the soil sat hard and gray beneath the decorative mulch. He noted the corners where water pooled and went stagnant. He noted the long bed along the eastern wall, where the expensive shrubs looked glossy on top but had shed yellowed leaves all season. A sign to a man who knew that their roots were choking in compacted, lifeless dirt. Pierce had built beauty, but he'd built it on ground that was, beneath the surface, nearly as dead as Eli's back 40. All the imported mulch and drip irrigation in the world only masked it. Garrett had paid for a costume, not a cure. Eli said none of this aloud. He simply nodded to the neighbor boys. Let's bring them up. The first trailer ramp came down. The crowd surged against the fence to see, and then the pigs began to emerge. They were not the snorting monsters the town imagined. They came out blinking and curious. Pink ones, black ones, spotted ones, big sows and quick young ones. 100 animals stretching and grunting in the morning sun. Marisol had named most of them. She greeted them by name as they trotted past, and a ripple of unexpected laughter went through the crowd. The pigs were, against all expectation, kind of charming. Eli directed the boys to set up portable electric fencing, the lightweight kind that delivered only a harmless tingle, to control where the herd could roam. He didn't want chaos, he wanted precision. He sectioned off the worst third of the garden first, the eastern bed with the choking shrubs, the stagnant low corner, and a long rectangle of compacted lawn that Pierce had never been able to keep green. You're fencing them in like it's surgery, Garrett scoffed. It's hogs in a flower bed. There's no method to mud. There's method to everything, Eli said, if you've got the patience to learn it. He opened the inner gate. The pigs flowed into the sectioned area, and the real work began. To the untrained eye, it was destruction. The animals rooted with their powerful snouts, flipping over mulch, tearing up the dead sod, churning the gray soil. Decorative edging toppled. A globe-shaped shrub leaned and fell. The crowd alternately winced and laughed. Garrett laughed loudest of all, slapping Pierce on the back. But Eli watched with the focus of a chess player, because the pigs weren't just making a mess. Their rooting was breaking up the rock-hard, compacted earth that no rototiller could safely reach without slicing irrigation lines. Their snouts drove down 8–10 inches, fracturing the dense layer that had been suffocating every root in that bed. They devoured the choking weeds whole, roots and all. The stubborn, deep-rooted invaders that came back every year no matter how often Pierce's crew sprayed them. And as they worked, they fertilized. Naturally, constantly, exactly where it was needed, working their droppings down into the very soil they were loosening. They trampled the toppled greenery into the dirt, where it would break down into compost. In 2 hours, those pigs did what would have taken a crew of men with machines a week to accomplish. And they did it better, because they did it the way living ground actually heals. From the roots up, mixing air and waste and broken matter back into starving earth. Eli moved the fencing. The herd flowed to the next dead section. The crowd settled in. Whatever this was, nobody wanted to miss it. By noon, the spectacle had become something stranger and more interesting than anyone expected. The crowd had stopped jeering. They'd started watching the way you watch a craftsman who clearly knows something you don't. Eli worked the herd across Garrett's garden in sections, like a man mowing a lawn in careful strips. Except his mower was 100 living animals, and the result wasn't a trim. It was a transformation of the ground itself. Each section he opened looked like ruin for the first hour. Then, as the pigs finished and moved on, what they left behind began to reveal its logic. The compacted lawn was now loose, dark, aerated soil, broken open and breathing for the first time in years. The stagnant corner, where water had pooled and rotted the roots of everything Pierce planted, had been churned and graded by relentless snouts until the low spot was filled. and the drainage path opened. The eastern bed, where the expensive shrubs had been quietly dying, was now bare, turned earth, and Eli walked it slowly, crouching to crumble a handful between his fingers. He held it up so Marisol could see. It crumbled soft and dark, threaded with broken plant matter and worked-in waste. Living dirt, where that morning there'd been gray cement. That, he said quietly, is the whole secret, right there in my hand. Marisol filmed it. She'd been filming all morning, the pigs by name, the crowd's faces shifting from mockery to fascination, her uncle's steady hands. She didn't fully know yet what she was making. She only knew it mattered. Around 1 o'clock, the mood among the watchers tipped. An old farmer named Del Hauser, who'd known Eli's grandfather, climbed down off his folding chair and walked along the fence to where Eli was repositioning the herd. "I haven't seen this done since I was a boy," Del said, voice rough. "My daddy talked about it. Pigs to break new ground," said the old-timers, swore by it before the chemical companies came through and told everybody it was backward. "It's not backward," Eli said. "It's just slow. And slow doesn't sell fertilizer." Del nodded slowly, eyes on the transformed beds. "Well, I'll be." Word of Del's reaction moved through the crowd, and the laughter dried up entirely. Now people were asking each other questions. Now people were leaning over the fence, trying to understand. A few of the high school kids had started helping the neighbor boys move fencing, caught up in it. Marisol moved through the crowd with her phone, catching the change. Garrett felt the shift, and he didn't like it. "This is theater," he announced, loud enough to recapture attention. "He's destroyed half my garden and convinced you all it's gardening. Look at it." He gestured at the churned, muddy expanse where elegant beds had stood that morning. "Does that look like an improvement to anyone with eyes?" And to be fair, it didn't, not yet. That was the trap of it, the part Eli had known would test the town's patience and Garrett's pride alike. The method looked like vandalism right up until the moment it didn't, and that moment was a whole season away. Right now there was only mud, fallen shrubs, and 100 contented pigs. "You're right that it looks bad," Eli said, and the honesty of it surprised everyone. "Today it looks like ruin. I won't pretend otherwise. But land's not judged by how it looks the day you work it. It's judged by what grows. Come spring, you'll see." "Come spring," Garrett sneered, "I'll have a landscaping bill that could buy your whole farm, and you'll have a story. That's the difference between us, old man. I deal in results. You deal in faith." "We'll find out which is which," Eli said. By 3 o'clock, the work was done. Eli walked the entire 3 acres one last time, the boys loading pigs back into trailers behind him, Marisol at his side. The garden was unrecognizable, the manicured perfection gone, replaced by open, turned, breathing earth. To Garrett and to many in the crowd, it looked like a disaster. To Eli, it looked like a field at the beginning of something. He'd left the formal front section untouched, by agreement. Garrett's prized entrance hedges still stood, pristine. A control group neither man had named but both understood. Everything behind them had been given back to the soil. "Now what?" Marisol asked as they latched the last trailer. "Now the hardest part," Eli said. "Now we wait. And I do the same thing to my own back 40 this week, while the season's still right. If I'm correct about his ground, I'm correct about mine. And if you're wrong about both..." He looked out over the churned acres, then up at Garrett watching from his porch, with his arms crossed and his expensive sweater and his certainty. "Then I learned something," Eli said. "But I don't think I'm wrong. I felt it in my hand." That week, Eli did exactly what he'd done to Garrett's garden, on his own dying back 40. He fenced it in sections and turned his 100 pigs loose on the hardest, deadest ground he owned, the acreage that had refused him for 3 years. The town heard about it. Now there were two experiments running: the banker's garden on the hill and the veteran's ruined field at the end of Cutter's Road. For one bright moment, standing in his own newly churned earth at dusk, Eli felt something he hadn't felt in years: certainty. His grandfather's voice, his own calloused hands, the soft dark dirt crumbling between his fingers. It was going to work. He could feel it. Then the first hard rain came, and everything got complicated. The rain came that night and didn't stop for 3 days. It was the heaviest autumn storm the valley had seen in a decade, and it fell on freshly turned earth that had no roots left to hold it. On Goret's Hill, the churned garden became a sea of mud that slid in brown rivers down the slope and pooled against the foundation of his estate. On Eli's back 40, the loose soil washed into gullies. To anyone driving past either property, both looked exactly like what the skeptics had promised. Ruin. Total, soggy, embarrassing ruin. Garrett seized it. By the time the rain stopped, he'd taken photographs from every unflattering angle and brought them to the diner, to the bank, to anyone who'd look. "Here's your soil wisdom," he announced, spreading the pictures across the diner counter. "Here's what hard work and pig manure get you. A mudslide against my house and a washed-out field. The man's a menace. I'm consulting my lawyer about the damage to my property value." The town, which had been leaning toward Eli a week ago, wavered. The pictures were ugly. The rain had made fools of them all, it seemed. People who'd cheered now avoided Eli's eye at the gas station. The story at the diner shifted back to poor Eli with a new edge. Dragged us all into believing it, too. Worse, the storm had genuinely damaged things. Two of Garrett's surviving ornamental trees, their roots loosened by the rooting, and then the flood, had toppled. Pierce, the designer, estimated the restoration cost in numbers that made the crowd gasp. Garrett let the number hang in the air like a verdict. Then he played his real card. He drove out to Cutter's Road on a gray morning and found Eli in the barn. He didn't bother with the porch. He came straight in, mud on his expensive boots, fury under his calm. "You humiliated me in front of my own town," Garrett said. "So here's how this ends. The mudslide damaged my foundation. My engineer says so. The cost of that, plus the garden restoration, comes to more than you'll make in 5 years. I could sue you into the ground." He paused. "Or you sign over the back 40 to the bank as settlement. I tell everyone we reached a gentleman's agreement, and we forget this ever happened. Your choice." Eli set down the feed bucket. "The mudslide came from your hill, not mine. And the storm did that, not the pigs. My lawyer disagrees, and my lawyer is better than yours." "You don't have a lawyer." Garrett smiled thinly. "You have until the end of the month. After that I file, and even if you win, which you won't, the legal fees alone will finish you. I hold your mortgage, Eli. I hold all of it. Pride is a luxury you can't afford." He turned and walked out, leaving boot prints across the clean barn floor. That afternoon, the pressure mounted from every side. The bank sent a formal letter referencing the mortgage and recent events affecting collateral value. A reporter from the county paper called, wanting a quote about the pig stunt gone wrong. Two of the neighbor boys' parents called Marisol to quietly pull their sons from any more of that business. Even Del Hauser, who'd believed, came by looking troubled. "I'm with you, Eli," Del said at the fence, "but I won't lie. The way it looks right now, it looks bad, real bad. And looking bad in a small town is its own kind of true." Eli stood in his washed-out field that evening, the gullies cut deep, the mud everywhere. And for the first time, his certainty cracked. He'd done it right. He knew he'd done it right. But the rain had come at the worst possible moment, before any roots could establish, and now the very evidence he needed was buried under brown sludge and uglier than the day he'd started. Marisol found him there as the light failed. "It needs cover," she said suddenly. He turned. "What?" "The journals. Your grandfather's journals." She held one up, pages marked. "After the pigs, he didn't just wait. He planted a cover crop, immediately, roots to hold the soil. Uncle Eli, we skipped a step." She was right. In his nervousness about Garrett, his focus on the dramatic part. The pigs, the public test. Ellie had let the most important quiet step slip. His grandfather's journals were clear. The rooting was only the first half. The moment the ground was opened and fed, you seeded it thick with a fast cover crop, clover, rye, vetch, so living roots could grab the loosened soil, hold it against the weather, and feed the underground life the pigs had started. Bare-turned earth was vulnerable, Planted turned earth was armor, he'd known it once. He'd simply let the noise of the fight crowd it out. We seed it now, Eli said. Tomorrow. Both fields. Mine and he stopped. And his, Marisol finished. But he'll never let you back on his property. Not now. That was the cruel knot of it. Garrett's garden was the public test. The one the whole town was watching. If it failed, Eli failed in the eyes of Hollow Creek, no matter how well his own back 40 recovered. And Garrett, furious and frightened, would sooner let his own garden stay a mud pit forever than let Eli fix it and be proven right. Garrett had stopped caring about his garden. He only cared about winning. For 2 days, Eli wrestled with it. He seeded his own thick with the cover crop blend, working dawn to dark Marisol and, quietly, a returning Del Hauser beside him. The living seed went into the loosened soil, and Eli could only pray the worst of the weather had passed. His own field, at least, had a fighting chance now. But the garden on the hill sat exposed and worsening, and it was the garden everyone could see from the road. Every day it stayed an ugly scar. Garrett's version of the story hardened into fact. The end of the month, and the lawsuit, and the loss of the back 40 crept closer. The bank letter sat on Eli's table. The reporter called twice more. At the diner, Eli's name had become a cautionary tale told over coffee. Garrett, sensing victory, grew bolder, telling anyone who'd listen that he'd given the old man rope and watched him use it. He even hinted he might bulldoze the ruined garden and start fresh with professionals, which would erase the evidence entirely before spring could ever vindicate the method. That was the real threat, not the lawsuit, the bulldozer. If Garrett destroyed the garden now, scraped it flat, and resodded it, no one would ever see what the pigs had truly done. The proof would be gone, paved over by money, exactly as Garrett always insisted money could do. Eli drove up the hill one last time to try reason. "You're going to scrape it," Eli said, standing at the foot of Garrett's porch. "Aren't you? Before spring, so nobody ever sees." Garrett didn't deny it. "I'm going to restore my property to its proper condition, with professionals. As is my right. You're afraid it'll work. I'm afraid of nothing." But something flickered behind his eyes when he said it, and Eli, who'd spent a lifetime reading men under pressure, saw it land. "Then leave it," Eli said quietly. "If you're so sure I'm a fool, leave the garden exactly as it is until spring. Let it prove me wrong in front of everybody. You lose nothing. You just wait, unless you already suspect what's coming." Garrett's jaw tightened. For a long moment, the two men stood in the cold, and the whole thing balanced on the banker's pride. To bulldoze now was to admit he was afraid of what spring would show. To wait was to gamble his certainty against the dirt. "Get off my property," Garrett said at last. But he didn't say he'd scrape it. He didn't say anything about the bulldozer at all. Eli drove home not knowing if he'd won a reprieve or lost everything. The month was nearly up. The lawsuit loomed. His own field was seeded but unproven, buried under winter's approach. And the public garden, the one that mattered to the town, sat in Garrett's hands, one phone call away from being erased forever. That night, the first frost came, sealing both fields under cold. Whatever was happening underground now happened in the dark, invisible, where no one could see it and no one could prove it. All Eli could do was wait through the winter and hope. The letter came on the last day of the month, not from Garrett, from the bank, formal and final. Given recent events and the diminished condition of pledged collateral, the Hollow Creek Savings and Trust was calling Eli's loan due in 90 days. Pay in full or surrender the farm. Garrett had found a way to win without even filing the lawsuit. He'd simply used the bank he controlled. Eli sat at his kitchen table with the letter and the brittle journals and felt every one of his 63 years. The pigs were just animals in a pen. The fields were frozen mud. The town thought him a fool. And the man who'd mocked his grandfather's wisdom was about to take the only thing Eli had left to prove it on. Winter closed in. That was the long, dark stretch of winter, and it was the loneliest Eli had known since his service years. The snow came and buried both fields. The phone stopped ringing, even the reporter had lost interest in a story everyone assumed was over. At the diner, his name faded into the ordinary gossip of a small town in cold months. He'd risked everything on a handful of dirt and a dead man's notebook. And now he sat in a cold farmhouse counting down 90 days to losing his home. One gray evening, he took the oldest journal to the wood stove and held it, half meaning to burn it. 40 years of believing his grandfather had handed him something true. And what had it gotten him? Mockery, a mudslide, a foreclosure notice. Maybe Garrett was right. Maybe hard work really was just a story men told themselves to feel better about losing. Martisol found him like that. Journal in his lap, fire reflected in his eyes. She didn't lecture. She just sat down beside him and opened her laptop. "I never told you what I've been making," she said quietly. She turned the screen toward him. It was the footage. All of it. The pigs by name. The crowd's faces changing. Del Hauser saying I'll be. Eli's own hands crumbling living soil. Cut together, honest and plain, it told the whole true story the mud had hidden. "You taught the land," she said. "Let me show the people. When spring comes, if it works, they'll have to see it. All of them." Eli set the journal down unburned. He stood up. The fire popped. Somewhere out in the dark barn, 100 pigs shifted and slept, warm and alive. "It'll work," Eli said. "Not hope this time. Decision." Grandpa's ground always came back. "We did it right, Mari. Pigs, then cover crop, then patience. The frost is just the soil resting. Come spring, those fields will tell the truth louder than veil ever could." He had 80-some days until the bank's deadline. Spring would arrive with weeks to spare. If the method held, then we wait for the thaw, he said. And when it comes, we don't whisper about it. We invite the whole town up that hill to look. He picked up the phone to call Dell. Spring came late that year, but it came hard and green. The thaw started in March, and Eli walked his back 40 every single morning, watching, waiting, barely breathing. For 2 weeks there was only wet brown ground and his own thudding doubt. Then, on a soft morning that smelled like rain and growth, he crouched at the edge of the field that had refused him for 3 years and saw it. Green. A faint, fierce blush of green across the entire back 40. The cover crop he'd seeded into the pig-worked soil had taken, thick and even, its roots knitting the once-washed earth into something solid and alive. But it was more than the cover crop, where the pigs had broken the iron-hard pan and worked in their waste. Where the gullies had been seeded and held, the soil itself had changed. He drove his hand into ground that had been like concrete a season ago, and it gave soft, dark, crumbling, threaded with worms and root, and the unmistakable smell of living dirt. The back 40 was alive. After 3 years of death, it was alive. Eli knelt there a long time. Then he laughed, a rough, rusty sound he hadn't made in years, and went to find Marisol. But his own field, healing as it was the private victory. The public one waited on the hill. And here came the thing Eli hadn't dared count on. Garrett, in his fury and his certainty, had never sent the bulldozer. Pride had frozen him exactly as Eli had hoped. "Leave it and let it prove me wrong." Garrett had left it. Too proud to admit fear, too sure of himself to imagine he'd need to hide anything. The garden on the hill had sat all winter under snow, untouched, the pig-worked soil resting and changing in the dark, exactly like Eli's own. Eli made the calls, so did Dell. So did Marisol, who'd quietly built an audience over the winter, posting short pieces of her footage. The pigs by name, the crumbling soil, the old veteran's steady hands. People in 3 counties had been following the story of the foolish farmer and the banker's garden, waiting, like everyone, to see how it ended. They gathered on a bright Saturday in April, almost exactly where they'd stood that autumn morning, along the white fence of Garrett Vale's estate. The diner crowd, the church crowd, the high schoolers, the old farmers, Del Hauser, the county reporter, back again. And Garrett himself on his porch, arms crossed, but the certainty in his face gone brittle. Because the garden had already begun to answer. The formal front hedges, the untouched control section, the part Eli had left pristine by agreement, looked exactly as they had in autumn. Neat, trimmed and ordinary, beautiful in the shallow costume way Garrett had paid for. But behind them, where the pigs had churned everything to mud and the town had cried ruin, it had exploded into life. The eastern bed, where the expensive shrubs had been quietly dying of choked roots, was unrecognizable. The surviving shrubs had thrown out vigorous new growth, glossy and deep green, their roots finally breathing in loosened, fed soil. Wildflowers Eli had seeded over the cover crop had come up in drifts of color. The compacted dead lawn was now thick, dark, springy turf. The stagnant corner that had rotted every root, Pierce planted, was dry and firm and green, its drainage fixed by 100 patient snouts. Volunteer growth clover, the cover crop gone lush, carpeted the worked ground in living emerald. Bees moved through it. The whole back garden hummed. The pig-worked soil hadn't just recovered. It had outgrown, outbloomed, and outlived the manicured, money-fed beds in front of it by a margin no one could argue with. The contrast was right there for every eye. The costume on one side, the cure on the other. Money's version and the land's version, separated by a row of hedges. The crowd went quiet, and then it didn't. Dell Hauser was the first to speak, his old voice carrying over the fence. Lord Almighty, would you look at that? He did it the old way. He actually did it. He turned to the crowd. My daddy told me this, and I half believed him. There it is. There it is in the dirt. The murmur became a buzz. The buzz became something like a cheer. People pressed to the fence, pointing. At the riot of life behind the hedges, at the bare, ordinary perfection in front of them, at the difference money couldn't fake, the reporter was photographing everything. Marisol was filming, tears on her face, getting all of it, the faces turning from old mockery to new wonder, the exact moment a town changed its mind. Garrett came down off his porch slowly. He walked into his own back garden, into the impossible green of it, and crouched the way he'd seen Eli crouch. He pushed his fingers into the dark, living soil. He'd paid a fortune for ground that died under designer mulch. And here, where he'd let 100 pigs and an old man's stubbornness work for free, the earth was richer than anything his money had ever bought. He stood up, dirt on his expensive hand, and for a long moment he didn't say anything at all. Then, in front of the whole town, the town he'd bragged to, the town he'd shown ugly photographs, Garrett Vale did the one thing Eli had asked for back in the autumn. He said it out loud. He was right. Garrett's voice was rough. I was wrong about the garden, about the method, about the man. He looked at Eli across the green. About all of it. It wasn't easy for him. You could it cost him something real. But there was something else in his face, too. A kind of relief, like a man setting down a weight he'd carried, so long he'd forgotten it was heavy. The bank called off the loan within the week. Not just deferred, Garrett restructured it himself on fair terms, then hired Eli on a consulting contract to naturally restore the grounds of 3 other properties the bank had foreclosed on, dead land nobody could sell. Suddenly, the veteran with 100 pigs and a dead man's notebook had more work than he could handle. Eli took it, but he took it his way, slow, honest, root deep. The way his grandfather had pressed into his hand all those years ago. The way the land had remembered all along. A year later, on a warm autumn afternoon, the harvest fair came round again to Hollow Creek. There was a new table this year, set up between the prize vegetables and the pie judging. Eli Mercer's, stacked with squash and beans and tomatoes grown on the back 40 that everyone had once called dead. Marisol ran it beside him. She'd stayed for good, turned her footage into a small business teaching the old methods to anyone who'd learn. Dell Hauser sat in a folding chair, supervising, and Garrett Vale, in plain clothes for once, stood in line like everybody else, waiting to buy a basket. Out at the end of Cutter's Road, in a field gone golden green, 100 pigs rooted contentedly through the soil, doing the quiet, patient, ancient work of bringing the land back to life.